Cancerian types who may feel very sensitive or overly intuitive or carrying emotions that aren't theirs might be because it is such an ancestral sign. Through its remembering, not resisting, we heal and we come home to ourselves.
Greetings from the Pacific Northwest. You're listening to Symbolic Studies Episode 6. I'm your host, Mario, once again joined by my lovely wife, Michelle. For more information about the show or my services, please visit symbolicstudies.com. If you'd like to become a monthly patron, you can do so at patreon.com/symbolicstudies or on my site. Michelle, my lady, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here.
Right on. Well, we are in Cancer season now, obviously, and we just recently celebrated the summer solstice. And for a number of reasons, I actually associate this time of year with festivities because I'm a Cancer sun sign, as you well know. In fact, we are polarity signs from each other. So I'm a Cancer sun sign. Michelle is a Capricorn. And this axis between Cancer and Capricorn is something that we've actually bonded over throughout the years. And it's a very powerful axis. There's a lot to talk about between the pair here. But what's going on in the garden these days now that we're officially in summer?
Lots of growth, actually. And it was very clear to me because we were actually gone on vacation for a week. So having been away from the land and away from the garden and coming back and seeing how much things have filled out. And so the growth that I'm really noticing is how things have filled out horizontally, not just vertically. Obviously, there's growth on both of those sides. But this time of year, I find that things are becoming more bushy. The flowers are starting to bud. Things are opening up a little bit more, as opposed to during that time in early and late spring when things are really shooting upward. Now things are kind of relaxing on that end, and they start to grow outward and kind of come into their own a little bit more.
Well, you know, that's really interesting because there is a growth dynamic with Cancer, right? And it really comes into play with the symbolism that's associated with the sign that relates to the womb, motherhood, you know, things like that. And so I could see that being the case. And to be honest with you, I had never really considered the horizontal versus vertical growth as being maybe something that's indicative of this time of year. But I do think that's really fascinating. And as we know as well, Cancer relates to the home. And so it's the house of the home. Cancerian people are said to be very warm and inviting and sort of have this presence that's very welcoming. And so the home dynamic is also really intriguing as well because of the crab itself and the fact that the crab has an external shell, and there's a lot of container symbolism that relates to Cancer. So I think of the shell of the crab. So if you're talking about a hermit crab as an example, or different types of crabs, they will get new shells. And so it's almost as though they're swapping out their home, right? The card that corresponds with Cancer is the Chariot, and often the charioteer is wearing armor. It's kind of indicative of that shell, right? This container sort of dynamic. And then also he's enclosed within a canopy, right? And this is related to this container vessel sort of thing. And even the vessel itself, or even the grail, relates to Cancerian symbolism. And even the animals that are often associated with Cancer, beyond just the crab, you know, I'm thinking of like the turtle or the beetle, they have this shell or exoskeleton that kind of reminds me of the container. And it kind of reminds me of the firmament, which is also the home of mankind, right? Symbolically.
Right.
So the home dynamic really is in play on multiple levels, even the womb being the symbolic first home of man, right? And then having different homes throughout their life.
Yeah, I love this dynamic because one of the things I think about with Cancer and what you're talking about and that exterior shell, but the soft interior. And so the same can be said about a house. Obviously, You're going to have hopefully firm walls, something that's protective. And on the inside, hopefully it's a warm, welcoming environment that you're going to want to stay in. And so those are some of the things that come to mind with this dynamic of the crab, or anything with an exoskeleton like the beetle or any kind of insect like that, which obviously the beetle is associated with Cancer as well. And knowing you so well and that you're a Cancer and seeing the dynamics that come through with Cancer through you. And my mother's also a Cancer, so is my stepfather. And so you guys have a lot of crossover when it comes to sometimes having that harder exterior that comes off on the public side, but actually way more sensitive, in tune, and in touch with your emotional side, which is a very important thing, obviously.
Definitely, definitely. And you know what's interesting too? This reminds me of the fact that, Cancer starts with can. And a can, like a tin can, is a vessel, right? And so it contains something. And that's one of my favorite things to do on an etymological level is find words within words. And so to me, the fact that there's so much container, vessel, grail symbolism with Cancer, and then literally it begins with CAN, which is also a vessel, to me makes a lot of sense. And I actually talked about this in a short video that I did about the Wizard of Oz and the Tin Man and how he kind of looks like a tin can as well. And I basically put forth in that video that he relates to Cancer-y, watery symbolism all day long. And he's looking for his heart, right? He wants to feel again, which is a very Cancerian sort of thing to do. Representative of that sort of interior that is hard to penetrate sometimes, or hard to kind of crack, right? So as usual, we have some voicemails to share with everyone today. And we've previewed these voicemails. And I have to say, they are excellent.
I second that.
Yeah, we have some very thoughtful, intelligent contributors here, and so I'm very excited to play those. But before we do that, I want to talk about the Cancer glyph. The Cancer glyph is very interesting. I think actually more people maybe talk about the Cancer glyph than perhaps any other sign. I feel as though as I'm going throughout the year and I'm making my posts, people recognize the Cancer glyph, and it's kind of iconic, I would say, as a zodiac symbol, right? I would say there's a lot of other signs that the glyph itself doesn't get as much attention, but that 6-9 of Cancer is immediately recognizable. It's emblematic or symbolic or kind of synonymous with the yin-yang glyph, right? Or the yin-yang symbol. But there are a few things that I want to get off my chest, a few realizations that I've come across recently about the glyph that I think are very, very intriguing. And so naturally, what I've said before about the glyph is that clearly it is rotating. It looks like it's supposed to be moving. This makes a ton of sense because a lot of symbolism related to Cancer has to do with water, has to do with the wheel, right? So Cancer corresponds with the Chariot card. Clearly a chariot can't move unless there's a wheel attached to it or several wheels attached to it. And so we're talking about wheel symbolism when we're talking about Cancer. And so we're talking about the wheel of life. We're talking about the symbolism of the wheel, which is incredibly deep. But you're also talking about the wheel of heaven. And so to me, I've always said that the 6-9 of the Cancer glyph really is emblematic of the rotation of the heavens, right? Of the wheel of heaven. And I think that this is in play as well, that symbolism with the Chariot card, because the charioteer, like in the Rider-Waite deck, he has a star on his head. And to me, this is symbolic of the central star, which would be the North Star. And then there's a canopy of stars above that, and this would be the firmament or the vault of heaven, right? And so this rotation of the stars, and I would say specifically the fixed stars, in my opinion, is what's kind of being conveyed with the 6-9 glyph. And to me, it all really comes together when you have an understanding that in traditional symbolism, the solstices were actually viewed as a symbolic pole, that there's a symbolic axis, right, as we were just talking about, between Cancer and Capricorn. And there's an axis that exists between all of the signs of polarity, right? But the solstices and the equinoxes specifically have been viewed as symbolic poles. And so this is fascinating, in my opinion, because when you're talking about pole symbolism and you're talking about axis symbolism, the original pole or axis through the traditional lens is the world axis, right? And so this is the axis that connects all that is above with all that is below. It's the bridge to heaven. It's the bridge to other realms. I say this all the time, but it's almost as though all of these realms above and below are not unlike wheels. They relate to wheel symbolism, and they all connect through their center, right? And so just like the chakra system, which I always talk about as well, the 7 chakras, chakra means wheel or disc, and they're all connected through their center. And so most people would recognize that as the spine, right? So the spine is a symbolic pole as well. And anyone who watches my Symbolic Secrets series will know that I'm really big on pole symbolism because it meant so much in the primordial ancient world and also in the golden age, right? And so there's a symbolic pole that exists between Capricorn and Cancer. And so this is fascinating because if there's a symbolic pole between the two, and world axis symbolism is sort of the origin of pole symbolism, or has a relationship at the very least with primordial pole symbolism, it makes sense then that the Cancer glyph is rotating around the world axis, which means that there's a connection there with the North Star, essentially. And it's been pointed out to me, shout out to Slick Dissident, and he was actually on the show last episode for Gemini. He put forth and just commented that the 6-9 of Cancer is probably more than likely the origin story comes from Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And so Ursa Major and Minor, that would be the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, the Great Bear and the Little Bear, revolving around the point of pivot in the heavens, right? So it's 2 vessels revolving around the North Star. And I made this case in my unicorn video, which I released during Cancer season. And I've made this case in my Royal Arch Freemasonry video as well. And so to me, that is what I'm seeing now with the 6-9 glyph. And the 6-9 glyph, when you look at it, it looks as though it's supposed to be rotating counterclockwise. The dippers revolve around the pole star counterclockwise. And the fixed stars go around the pole star counterclockwise, right? And so to me, this is a clear indication that this is more than likely the origin story for this glyph. It is yin yang, it is, things that rotate. I think of a spinning top, I think of the wheel, etc. But when you're taking all of those symbols into account, when you're looking at the most fundamental sort of symbolic aspect of all those things, it is the rotation of the heavens. And I'm of the opinion that it's really the heavens rotating around us, right? So I think this is something that's worth noting, that the counterclockwise rotation is emblematic of the fixed stars going around the point of pivot in the heavens. And this relates the charioteer, by the way, with being the unmoved mover or being the prime mover. And this is one of the secrets of the chariot card, is that the chariot is actually not going anywhere.
Right.
It's actually not moving. And you're going to see this more so in older decks. Newer decks kind of lose this symbolism, but the older decks have it retained, basically. And the idea is that the charioteer, in by being stationary and by being present, causes the wheel to turn, pretty much. And when you're talking about the counterclockwise rotation, this is a polar rotation, meaning that it actually draws you inward, versus the clockwise rotation, which is more expansive and moves you away from the center. The counterclockwise rotation draws you inward, and that's so Cancerian as well, given everything that we've talked about with the vessel and this dynamic too of Cancerian people being more introverted, right? Having more of a rich inner landscape, I would say. And also with the crab itself. And the crab retreats, and the crab goes side to side. And so the crab is known for sort of withdrawing, basically. So there's a whole withdrawing dynamic with Cancer, with the crab, and then even the counterclockwise rotation of the fixed stars around the pole star.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And when you brought this up and we started talking about it last night, I mean, it really resonates. And it resonates on a lot of levels. And I think for me, it's that internal movement that really comes through strong. And it makes me think about the turtle as well, which is also associated with Cancer, which also retreats into its shell. And the thought of the North Star and the pole star and you finding your true north being such an important aspect in life, and that also kind of coming through in Cancer, and that 6-9 just rotating within itself continuously, in and out, into itself. And that to me is really strong and very important when you're looking at Cancer and this time of year as well.
So the other thing I'll say about this, and if people want more of a deep dive, definitely check out my Cancer Freemasonic Royal Arch video, because this is the esoteric symbolism of Cancer, in my opinion. It symbolically represents the top of the Royal Arch. And if you're looking at the Royal Arch of Freemasonry and the keystone oftentimes has the Cancer glyph. And this is the top of the firmament, because the top of the firmament is where the North Star is located, symbolically. This is sort of the esoteric traditional symbolism, right? And this point in the heavens has been viewed as the stairway to heaven. So it symbolically connects with the middle pillar, the axis mundi or world axis, and everything else. So this would be sort of the transcendental point in the night sky, basically. And Cancer is associated with it. So this idea that Cancer was once called the gateway of man also relates to this concept. It's the opening to get into this place or domain. And then Capricorn has been viewed as the gateway of the gods, right? Sort of the point of exit. And there's a lot to be said about this whole entire dynamic. It's something that we could talk about, for a very, very long time. But the thing I want to say is that there's a whole Jewish tradition, esoteric Judaism, called Merkava mysticism. And the idea is that your Merkava or Merkaba, which is basically your light body or energetic body, is not unlike a chariot. That's what Merkava means. It means chariot. And so Merkava mysticism is the idea that in your light body, which is a chariot, you can actually, through different meditation techniques, go to different planes of existence. And their doctrines essentially say that you're penetrating the northern sky, basically, and you're actually using the world axis to get to other planes. But it's through your own personal chariot. So humans have thought of their light body or energetic body literally as chariots in some schools of thought, right? And Peter Levenda's book, Stairway to Heaven, really gets into this. So there's a whole interesting dynamic with considering your most etheric self being related to a vehicle of sorts, and specifically a chariot. And there is a world axis, Stairway to Heaven sort of dynamic with all of this stuff. So it's a nice complete package, because even in that system, they always talk about 7 steps or 7 different thresholds or 7 planetary realms to visit. And when we're talking about the chariot card, we're talking about the 7th card in the major arcana. And also when we're talking about Cancer in the tropical system, most of it takes place in July, which is also the 7th month. And we know how important the number 7 is as well.
Yes.
And I even see it too, that the shape of number 7 literally comes from Ursa Major itself, right? Which I've talked about at length before. So anyways, lots of stuff going on there, but I just wanted to talk about the glyph briefly and kind of present my new findings. And so that means then, once again, that if we're talking about a symbolic pole between Capricorn and Cancer, it makes all the sense in the world that the Cancer glyph is rotating counterclockwise, and it puts it right in line with northern polar symbolism. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying our discussion on Cancer symbolism so far. If you aren't already aware, I have a series called Symbolic Secrets that's only available through my site or via Patreon. It's a video presentation series. At the moment, I'm releasing 1 episode for every major arcana card, and I've released 15 so far. That's about 15 hours worth of exclusive content. Links for everything can be found at symbolicstudies.com. Or if you want to sign up at Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/symbolicstudies. This is also the perfect way to support the show if you like what you're hearing, and it's only $5 a month. Back to the episode. All right, well, with all of that said, let's move on to our first voicemail, and this is our featured guest for this episode. This is from Emily Ridout, and I've streamed with her a couple of times over the years. She actually is a fellow Pacific Northwest resident, and I really appreciate her perspective, and I think she really delivered with this voicemail. So let's give it a go and see what Emily has to say regarding the symbolism of Cancer.
Hi Mario, this is Emily Ridout. I'm calling to talk to you about Cancer energy. So, in pop culture, they would have you believe that the zodiac sign of Cancer is simply related to the energy of motherhood and emotionality. And while this is true, there's a lot of depth that I think gets left out in typical conversations surrounding the Cancerian archetype. So first of all, we have the energy of the mother, but it's not the archetypes we typically consider in pop culture, which is sort of like the Mother's Day, flowers and goodness, or the dark mother archetypes. But instead, we're looking at the archetype of the mother as the being who draws you into form and then protects and nourishes you until you are able to self-sustain. Now, this is true of literal mothers, but this is also true of what Cancer is doing in the body and also in the life force expression. So one thing that we often forget about is that there is a process that's constantly happening. It's a uniform fact in life where we are being driven, guided, prodded by a couple of things. One is our own senses and our wayward folly, and one is our higher self toward our growth. And so no matter what you're going through in life, you're growing in some manner according to these systems, whether you know it or not. Similarly, babies are growing. We are growing. Mothers who are pregnant are growing children in their bellies, and we are moving toward these stages of growth. So it makes sense that Cancer, which rules over this growth, which I'll get to in the body in just a second, is considered the archetype of the mother. Now, along with the archetype of the mother, Cancer in the body rules the ribs, chest, breasts, stomach, and pituitary body. So when we're looking at Cancer in the body, we have not the disease, of course, the sign. We have the protection with the ribs. We have the chest and breasts, which are our original feeding source, and the stomach where we receive nourishment. So this indicates protection and nourishment. Now, before I get into the pituitary body in the brain, I want to bring up the fact that Cancer more generally rules over the waters of the body. This is very interesting because Cancer is opposite the sign of Capricorn, which rules over the structure of the body. So literally the bones, so the inner structure, and the skin, the outer structure. Between the bones and skin are the waters of your form, and most of your body is structured water. We have this understanding that there's a crystalline structure of water, and it is particularized within people. Now, there's so much information about this already on the internet and in the world right now, but water can be structured in particular ways that are harmonious and life-enhancing or ill-harmonious. And so with the Cancerian archetype, one of the things that's going on is we are being guided towards something. And we're talking here like multiple lifetimes of growth. We're talking about growing sometimes through lessons. And when we're talking about growing through lessons, if you look at the zodiac sign of Cancer in the tarot, we have the Chariot key. And in the Chariot key, you see a charioteer in a chariot that looks pretty stable. It's a cube of stone, and then two sphinxes guiding this chariot, or sitting in front of the chariot, I should say. So in this, the sphinxes represent the senses. And when Cancerian energy goes awry in the body, it's because we're using the two sphinxes of the senses to guide us rather than the charioteer, who is indicative of the higher self. So the two sphinxes are our desires and our aversions. And this is a useful thing to understand, that our desires and aversions will get us where we're going one way or the other, right? We have this understanding here that the desire force sometimes will take us somewhere eventually we don't want to go, or our aversions will avoid the work we need to do. and yet inevitably will grow. Now, the fastest path toward proper growth is through the direction of the higher self, which is represented in the Chariot card as the charioteer. Now, within the Chariot card, the body itself, this thing of Cancerian energy, is shown in the stone cube, which students of the tarot will recognize the stone cube as indicating a couple things. One, the wholeness of the cube of space, and two, the unity of the lower self, or the self-conscious self, and the subconscious self with the higher self, who is more connected to the oneness of all things. Now, we have this information. And when we're looking at the Cancerian energy, we're talking about directional growth. So one way to grow is just through life experience. But the other way that Cancerian energy helps us grow is through the direction of the higher self. And this is where the pituitary body comes into play. Cancer is the zodiac sign ruled by the moon. And the moon represents cycles of growth and decay. Likewise, Cancer energy is associated with the ocean, the tides moving in and out. Even if you look at the zodiac sign of Cancer within the tarot, we find that the Chariot card connects to the Hebrew letter Het, which indicates a field with definite boundaries, which is an obvious reference to the body itself, right? It is a field with definite boundaries, and the personality self as well. So when we're looking at all of that, and we understand that the body is made of structured water, and we understand that Cancerian energy is directional growth, and the nurturing and the growth directed by the mother, then we understand, because the mother is connected to subconsciousness, this capacity that connects us with all beings everywhere, that we're actually being directed through this energy toward our growth. And the part of the body that creates growth within the body, that regulates endocrine gland function, and that essentially creates the situation in the body, the chemical situation in the body for the opening of the third eye, it is the pituitary body in the brain, which is connected to the moon. It's connected to this sign of Cancer, and it helps us to understand that it's very subtle, right? Very subtle mechanisms in the body begin to shift when we enter into that space of directionality through the higher self. So the direction of what is in your highest good and best interest, rather than what is just simply the senses driving us somewhere, but the direction of higher perspective and higher intent. So when that happens, something very miraculous and also very natural begins to happen in the brain, which is you begin to secrete particular messages, right? Hormones, shifts in blood chemistry, very slight shifts, right? That create the necessary state in the body, the form of structured water, the field of personal experience to grow. Now, if you're not doing this on the internal plane, it's happening through the senses, as I mentioned, on the external plane, where this is happening in the field of experience external to the being. But one way or the other, Cancer energy is the energy of growth. And like the emotions and like the many archetypes of the mother, it can be gentle, nurtured, and peaceful and calm, or it can be intense. And so this is really the sense of Cancer energy. I could go on. I want to keep this under 10 minutes for you. Mario, it's always a joy to connect with you. You're doing good, amazing work out in the world, and just a lot of appreciation for you. If anybody listens to this or use any of this and they want to know more about astro yoga in particular, just send them my way or send them to astroyoga.org. And I hope you are having just the most amazing solstice season.
All right, Emily, thank you so much for that contribution. That was really, really awesome, and you gave us a lot to chew on there, right? A couple of things that stood out. I'm so glad she mentioned the cube of space as it relates to the cubic stone that is the chariot in the chariot card. One thing I just want to mention regarding that is it's just like a die, right? So there's 6 different sides, but there's a hidden correspondence with the cube with the number 7, because the point in the middle would be the 7th point, right? And so when you're talking about the cube of space, you have forward, backward, up, down, left, and right. And so that's 6 different sides, but the center would be the 7th point that this whole entire system of the cube actually hinges on. And so the 6 directions of space emanate from the 7th point, and we're dealing with the 7th card, once again, of the major arcana. And we're dealing with, again, July being the 7th month, and all of these things related to the number 7. So I just wanted to point that out, because when she was talking about growth, I definitely think there's an expansive growth. Let's not forget that Jupiter is actually exalted in Cancer, and Jupiter is well known for having this expansive, growing quality to it. But I also think of inner growth as well, and sort of the journey within. So even the idea of journeying in general, on one hand, of course, you know, if you imagine someone journeying and they're going from point A to point B in the physical world, that is also emblematic of an internal journey as well, right? And so that I think is intriguing. And then also she mentioned a few things about water and structured water, and we've hardly touched upon that at all, really. And the idea of water just being another aspect of ether spirit, I think is always in play, and something to kind of be reminded of. And so we know that water has a form that's solid, a form that's more like gas or vapor, of course, the liquid form. But the highest expression of water may very well be spirit itself. And also, it's been said that light, and this is something that I really got into when I was looking into the esoteric symbolism of the Cancer keystone royal arch sort of thing, is that water might be liquid light. And in fact, the alternative name for the chariot card is Lord of the Triumph of Light. And so there's something to be said about all of that. Probably too much to get into here. But yeah, I thought that was fantastic. So what'd you think about the voicemail, Bub?
Yeah, wonderful. And I have to say, listening to Emily's voicemail, I just want to acknowledge how much appreciation I have for her. Ever since we first came across her work and have been able to stream with her, I've interviewed her before as well, and she just has really great insights and goes above and beyond what you're going to find in the astrology world in general, like on that surface level. She goes deep, and I just wanted to give her kudos for that. One of the things for me that stood out so much in her voicemail was the structured water element, because I think that that is such an important thing to point out in general, but then with Cancer, but especially within our own bodies. And the fact that water can be structured, it can be programmed, and this has been proven time and time again. There's many different studies that are out there. There's handfuls of people that are studying structured water and how it can hold on to messages, it can hold on to frequency, it can hold on to energies that are projected onto it. So this goes along with the fact that we can program ourselves, and our thoughts and our actions are so important and really play such a huge role in how we live our lives and the outcomes that we get with situations that we're encountered with. How we react to something is continuously actually structuring our own water, and is going to propel you, or it's going to hold you back, or it's going to do a little of both. And you might have to unprogram or reprogram depending on how you've been living your life.
Well, it reminds me of the classic study where people put different labels on glasses of water, jars of water, and the label that has hateful, despicable, negative things on that label versus a label that has more loving, caring sort of words on it, the structure of the water changes. based on the words that are actually put on these jars of water, right? So just like what you're saying, it's like your attitude is really going to dictate, kind of like what your system is actually going to produce or emanate, right? So if you're thinking one way all the time, well, that's probably going to lead to certain dynamics, within the body, obviously. Well, related to water holding memory, the Hebrew letter mem is water, and memory begins with mem.
Wow. Yes.
So MEM, right? And so there's something about all of that as well. So yeah, definitely a fascinating rabbit hole that's always worth talking about.
And one last thing that did come to mind, and I'm going to pull plants in somehow, right?
Of course.
With the structured water, with Cancer, as Emily mentioned, kind of ruling the bodily waters, the plant that came to mind this morning, because I was harvesting it this morning, is calendula. Also known as pot marigold. Lots of people know this plant. It's very common, and it's one of my favorite flowers to grow for a lot of reasons because there are a lot of medicinal qualities to it. The most popular rulership is the sun, but it's also ruled by water. And it's one of those plants that once you start learning about it and really tuning into it, you really do see the watery aspects. Not only within the structure of the plant itself, the leaves hold a lot of moisture. They're soft to the touch. They're almost spongy. You have this beautiful bright orange flower that mirrors the sun. I mean, it is so golden and bright. And it's actually one of the most brilliantly orange flowers that will appear during this time in the garden. And you typically will hear that it's great for the skin, which it is. Okay. Calendula is wonderful as a skin tonic. It can be used to heal the skin and nourish the skin. But one of the things that sometimes is not always talked about with calendula is its use internally for healing the gut. And the gut relies on water just like our body does. And so this aspect of water with calendula coming in and can kind of reduce inflammation, can reduce heat. The stomach is an area that can carry a lot of heat and it can carry a lot of inflammation. And so it's just something I wanted to bring to the table for an herb that if you're looking for a plant to look for in July, calendula would be a great one that I think can be associated with Cancer in a lot of ways.
Well, and how holistic is it to think about Cancer, which is a known water sign, which is the only sign ruled by the moon, yet it's also the first sign of summer, which is clearly associated with the sun. And actually, it's interesting as well because we were talking about the crab retreating. Well, now the sun is starting to retreat.
Ah, great point.
So that's the whole entire dynamic of it. So with the winter solstice, the sun is starting to come back if you live in the northern hemisphere. With the summer solstice, it's actually starting to retreat, just like a crab, right? But yet we see and experience so much sunlight during this time of year, obviously. And it's also interesting, too, because Cancer, being the only sign ruled by the moon, is right next to Leo, which is the only sign ruled by the sun. And so there really is kind of this nice sort of complete holistic package kind of going on with Cancer in many ways that I kind of see and appreciate now, including the fact that, like I said earlier, the glyph is very similar to the yin-yang glyph, which yin being feminine and yang being masculine. So there's just as much lunar symbolism associated with Cancer as there is also solar symbolism, I would say. And also, I would say, polar symbolism. And I haven't said it this episode, but I really think that the signs of the zodiac have a common origin story. And I think that it is primordial and polar in nature. And you can watch my extended presentations to get into some of that material if you're interested or if you're hearing this for the first time. But I see that Cancer definitely has all of these things kind of associated with it, which reminds me of the fact that some tarot card creators have associated the charioteer or the chariot with also Mercury. And Mercury has a solar dynamic, a lunar dynamic, and also a polar dynamic, which I've talked about. And in fact, I bring up this specific thing in my chariot card Symbolic Secrets episode as well, if people want to learn more. The last thing I'd like to say about Emily's voicemail is she did emphasize several times the higher self, right? And this is beautifully echoed in the chariot card as well, because what you see, like in the Rider-Waite version, is you see the charioteer, you see his upper half, but his lower half is essentially fused into that cubic stone. And one of the traditions is that the lower half of the charioteer is actually not seen. You are not going to see it in traditional decks because the chariot itself is covering up his lower half. So you can see his higher nature, but you can't see his lower nature. His lower nature is hidden. And this relates to a line of mythology, in my opinion, that basically associates charioteers with having serpentine legs. And so look no further than the once king of Athens, Erichthonius, for correspondence there. So Erichthonius was born with serpentine legs. As such, he was abandoned by his parents. He was sent down a river and was eventually found. And he was found and he was raised by women who took care of him. He would become king and he would become an inventor of the first 4-horse chariot, which is called the quadriga. And he also started basically what became the Olympic Games. That's one of the dynamics with it. And so he invented the chariot because he had serpent legs. And so he needed a way to get around, right? This also parallels symbolism with Abraxas, right? So Abraxas is the rooster-headed charioteer with serpent legs, right? And basically, Abraxas has a huge correspondence with Cancer, in my opinion. There's even 7 letters of Abraxas, and he's said to relate to the 7 rays. The 7th ray is invisible and truly transcendental, which relates to that 7th point in the middle of the cube and everything else. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of get that off my chest briefly. The higher nature of the charioteer and the lower nature of the charioteer being related literally to stone and this cubic stone, right? So things that she was saying in her voicemail definitely reminded me of some of that stuff.
Great point. And the other thing it makes me think of is when you came across this information about the charioteer perhaps having snakes for legs, there was a whole connection with armor. And the reason that the charioteer is in armor is because it was actually to maybe cover up the fact that he had snakes for legs. And I always remember that. And then we go back to the Tin Man and the shell and the crab and the turtle and the beetle, and it all makes sense and is all connected.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a really, really nuanced detail. But the Thoth deck, when you look at the chariot version of the Thoth deck, he's wearing armor. Yeah. He's completely enclosed. And his legs, you actually can see his legs in that version. That's more of a modern deck, right? And it almost looks like his legs are serpentine legs. It's a whole entire thing that I was geeking out on years ago. But I have a video about it if people want to look into it further.
Hello, Mario and Michelle, the dynamic duo. It's Katrina from Australia. Wanted to share a couple thoughts I had on Cancer. Archetypally, in terms of astrology, Cancer is often associated with the motherhood, pregnancy, due to its rulership by the moon, of course, and also home. They often described, Cancerian people as very homely. Home is their sanctuary and so on. So I wanted to ask the question, what is this home that Cancer is associated to or linked to, whether it's symbolically. We look at, just the crab, the symbol of the crab, the shape of it. Reminds me very similar to the 2 horns, resembling the uterus. The pincers of the crab look like the fallopian tubes with the ovary. So are we referring to the first home of man, the womb? Or are we referring to a home as in earth, the place that we live in? I think of, the other association you have brought up with Cancer is, for example, in Babylonian astrology and ancient Egypt, the constellation Cancer was often represented by a tortoise or a turtle. And we have numerous creation myths around the world centering on a world turtle. For example, like in North America, across to Asia, China, and, South Africa even, and India, of course. So there's something to say there with the tortoise or the turtle as this world home or representative of the earth in some way. And, this then brings me back to the tarot system with the Chariot card, for example. And, we can see that canopy across over the charioteer. That's a star-filled canopy. And could this be alluding to the Milky Way? Which draws me back to Cancer in astrology is rules over the body parts of the stomach as well as the mammary glands, the breast in women. And this reminds me of the story of the Milky Way. Is that canopy of stars allusion to the Milky Way galaxy, which, as we know in myths, we have the story of Hera's breast milk spilling that formed the Milky Way. And, could that be an allusion to that? And I want to talk again about, the uterus. So why would a crab be used to identify a woman's uterus or fertility? I think what's similar between a crab and a woman is crabs actually will molt and shed their exoskeleton several times throughout their life. They will do this until they actually reach what is called a terminal molt. And what does a woman do every month? And we get month from moon, of course, but every month a woman is shedding her endometrium lining. Sorry, that word tricks me up all the time. The lining of the womb, which would form the placenta if fertilized. So again, that hearkening to the womb symbolism there. And mammary glands also are a form of container for water. And Cancer has that water element to it. And just wanted to share those aspects of Cancer in reference to the home. Hi, Mary and Michelle. It's Katrina again. I just wanted to add a few things on Cancer. So, according to Roman mythology, the Cancer constellation was placed in the sky after Heracles had crushed the crab that pinched his toes when he was fighting against the Hydra. And Juno, which is the Greek equivalent of Hera, or to the Egyptians Hathor, she placed the crab in the sky. And when does Cancer month begin? It begins on the solstice on the 21st and 22nd of June, which is when the sun is at its zenith point. And the month of June is named after that Roman goddess Juno. So I thought that was an interesting correlation, as well as coming back to the tarot system, where the Chariot card, of course, is a corresponding card to Cancer. And, for the prototypical Roman hero, the charioteer was the god Mars, who was the son of the Blessed Virgin Juno. So there's that connection with Juno again. And what I find interesting with the Chariot card is I do wonder if the wagon is probably the earliest prototype of the Chariot card. If we were to throw back to early agricultural age, when, the wagon would be carrying the harvest, which part of which would be sacrificed to the vegetation gods and goddesses, which we then see transferred onto the king symbolism of the sacrificial king. And, some scholars describe the Chariot card as indicative of the king of the world, who rides this chariot and is often sacrificed. And this idea of blood sacrifice or bloodletting and death, this corresponds again with the moon, with the death, but also the bloodletting, the blood sacrifice. I think this bleeds back, pun intended, to menstruation, to the menstrual symbolism of women. Women are natural bleeders, flowers, whereas men are, the only way they bleed is to be pricked. So it's this idea of the bloodletting sacrifice. But and I think coming back to the turtle symbolism too is quite interesting. Are we looking at the Chariot card as, indicative of the world, of the earth, with the canopy of stars above it? Could that be an allusion to the Milky Way galaxy? As we know, Cancer rules the body parts of the stomach and the mammary glands of the breast. And, we have myths where the Milky Way was formed or created by the breast milk spilt from Hera's breast. So, I do sort of see that play of lots of symbolism, a lot of layers of symbolism with the Chariot card. And, there's also this idea of Oriental scholars suggesting that the charioteer is representative of the soul or the mind, and the horses are indicative of our desires or uncontrollable emotional drives, and we often see them pulling in opposite directions, but the chariot goes nowhere. So it's this idea of, where's the road leading us to? Do we have any control, or do the fates really control us and we have no say? And this also corresponds really nicely to the opposite sign of Cancer, which is Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn Kronos, the karmic lord. So I see this interplay between Cancer and Capricorn there in terms of the fates. And, it leads us to question, where does the charioteer lead to? This road to death, this road of no return, the road of the chariot. And I think this can also play into the symbolism of the moon, as you've often described. There's references a lot of symbolism with the moon being like a portal for the souls of the departed. So yeah, that's just extra stuff I wanted to add there.
All right, Katrina, thank you so much for that submission. Wow, I got a lot out of that. I think that was valuable information for sure. So thank you for submitting that. And the first thing that comes to mind that I want to bring up is the fact that you brought up the wagon predating the chariot. This does make sense to me on a lot of different levels. It seems like a very practical thing that the wagon, to transport, grains or to transport anything really, predated the chariot, and the chariot being more of a complicated sort of thing to sort of develop or invent. And so this reminds me of the fact that Ursa Major has been referred to as a wagon. It's been referred to as a wagon, a chariot, a wain, something along these lines. And so it lines up with what I was saying with the 6-9 potentially being emblematic of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor going around the pole star, basically, right? She also mentioned the world turtle, which I think is definitely in play and makes a lot of sense, given the fact that some cultures didn't necessarily see a crab, but they saw a turtle. To me, this is interesting because when you look at world turtle symbolism and you look at illustrations of a world turtle, more often than not, you're going to see 4 elephants on top of the turtle holding up Earth, essentially. And so Earth is always associated with the number 4. And so this is also the case in the chariot card, with the 4 pillars surrounding the charioteer being representative of a number of things. The 4 cardinal directions, you can imagine them as being like the 4 fixed signs. There's always this idea of there being 4 pillars, sort of, that hold up the firmament, or that there's 4 corners of Earth, or that there's 4 winds, that emanate from the corners of Earth, or emanate from the center of Earth and go out to the corners. Something along those lines. So that was very much appropriate and appreciated. The idea as well of the moon having this relationship with time, and she brought up month being related to the moon, moonth, right? There's actually a handful of words that begin with M-O-N or M-I-N or M-A-N or M-E-N that go back to the moon. So month is the clear sort of, easy example there. Obviously, we have minute as well. So the M-I-N, I'm inclined to think, and based on my research, that actually goes back to the moon. Menstruation also goes back to the moon, as it's been talked about and discussed today. And so there's a handful of other words that relate to that. But even man, that man relates to the moon. And it's been said that mankind is very lunar in nature, in that we're always evolving and we're always changing, just like the moon itself, right? And even the moon too, as it waxes and wanes, it has this distinct crescent, right? And the crescent itself has been viewed as an arc or a boat. And that this is emblematic too of just like the journey of life, you know, and this constant sort of movement. And just movement in general, obviously, is very, very lunar. And so I haven't said it today, but it's really interesting. When you look at the word ocean, phonetically, you add an M, and now you have motion. And then you add an E, and now you have emotion. So when you just take the word emotion, which is very Cancerian, very lunar, very much related to water, right? You remove the E, motion, remove the M, phonetically have ocean. So all of these words and concepts are completely baked into each other. And related to that, I would say as well, blood and blood sacrifice, like what she was bringing up with menstruation, with life, you know, and what gives us life and sustains life. And the idea of a monthly sacrifice, a monthly sacrifice, right, with the menstrual blood. There's just so much to kind of riff on with all of that. But also the idea of the Grail holding the blood of Christ is also in play. Another sacrifice, right? And so even in the Crowley deck, the Thoth deck, it said that the charioteer is holding a Grail, and that right in the middle of it is a drop of blood, right? So there's so much blood symbolism that can be said regarding just this weave of Cancer and the Chariot card and everything else. But did you have anything you wanted to get off your chest regarding Katrina's voicemails here?
Well, as always, thank you, Katrina, for your wonderful insights. Always bringing it. Thing that stood out to me the most is the aspect of blood. So kind of going off of what you were saying, the shedding of the uterine lining is always interesting to me. And to me, what comes to mind is the thought of change, the thought of a detox. It's a monthly cleanse for a woman. So a woman has a built-in cleanse that happens. There's many opinions on cleanses. We don't need to go into that necessarily, but what it makes me think of is sometimes we have to let go of things in order to change. In order for something to move, a lot of times something has to be sacrificed or released or just cut from your life or your thoughts or what have you in order for you to transcend. And that to me is what comes through with Cancer as well, because there is that internal, external motion that is constantly happening and it's not going to stop for anyone. And so the more baggage you have, the more things you're attached to, the harder it's going to be to move.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And even just the idea of movement means that you have to let go of where you just were.
Exactly.
So if you're going to move forward, you have to let go of your current circumstance or your current situation. So this is what people say, you know, the sort of philosophy of die daily, you know, let things go, turn into something that you want to become, you know, basically evolve and grow. And that's the only sort of path towards enlightenment in a way. You have to let go of your preconceived ideas, you know, of what you thought your life maybe was going to be or whatever. You know, I think a lot of people hold on to certain concepts that are actually detrimental to them because they have held on to this sort of concept so strongly that it's preventing them from forward progress, essentially just like what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely. And lastly, what comes to mind with this change is the act of deadheading a flower or a plant. So, and back to calendula. Calendula is one of the flowers that benefits highly from being deadheaded. So the more you harvest, the more that plant is going to produce. And that is something that I've found very beautiful in the world of flowers and the world of plants, is that sometimes cutting things away and trimming things, it actually accelerates the growth, and it can take a plant that wasn't doing so well to a plant that begins to thrive, even if it's in the next season, if it's a perennial or something like that, or a shrub or a bush. Elder comes to mind with that aspect. It likes to be trimmed. It likes you to trim its fat so that it can actually next season come through and thrive even more and be the healthiest it can be.
You know, this is reminding me of the fact that when you look into chariot symbolism, there was a sort of motto or saying associated with the chariot, and it was, the road of the chariot is the road of death.
Ooh.
And if the charioteer is a warrior and he's heading into battle, he is wearing armor, after all. Mm-hmm. And if there's a Mars correspondence and this king-like sort of correspondence, you know, just like what Katrina said regarding the sacrifice of the king, this makes a lot of sense. And if we're talking about Merkava mysticism or the Stairway to Heaven or the Road to Heaven or something along those lines, it all kind of just makes sense to me. The road of the chariot is the road of death, or is the path of death. And so there's something to be said about accepting your fate that way. And when you accept death, perhaps that's when you really start living life. Also, I'm grateful that she mentioned the idea of the moon being a portal. There's several ways of looking at this. As an example, on the moon card, it looks like there are droplets going towards the moon. And I see this as being related to a lot of older myths where the moon was collecting souls symbolically. That's what people have said, that it's a collector of sorts. This is really interesting, too, because the moon is so receptive, which is in contrast to the projective sun, right? And even the moon is littered with craters, and the craters look like symbolic vessels. And so the vessel holds, the vessel contains. Feminine symbolism is more receptive than masculine symbolism. Masculine symbolism is way more projective, right? This is the yin versus the yang. And so it works on that level, right? That the moon collects the souls of the dead. Also, it works on another level where when you start looking into these various ascension techniques from these old doctrines, it's said that you want to stop at the moon before you go to other planes of existence that correspond with the planets. And so the moon is symbolically a stepping stone to get to other places. And so if the moon is the stepping stone or a gateway to go to other places, as an example, on the moon card, the moon is generally seen with two towers. And we know that when you show two towers or two trees or two buildings, it looks like a gateway, just like the Gemini twins, right? It creates an opening or portal. And so that symbolism is completely baked into the moon card, for sure. And so if the moon is a stepping stone to other planes of existence, that means that it's also the last gateway back to this realm. And the reason why it's been said that the moon carries sort of this title, or this role, rather, is because it's the closest luminary that we have. And so it's something that we have as humans, a very intimate relationship, more so than any of the other planets, symbolically, because you can actually see detail of the moon with your naked eye when you're out and about at night. Right. You can't say that with Saturn. You can't say that with Mars. You can't say that about any of these other planets. So this idea of the gateway, there's multiple ways of looking at it. And then, of course, lunar symbolism as it relates to pregnancy and childbirth. Mother is the actual gateway into this domain.
Great point.
Cancer is seen as the nurturer, the builder of the home, and the primary parent. But I believe that it's Gemini who builds the nest. Gemini shapes the walls, crafts the structure, and uses its hands to create out of joy, and it rarely acts out of duty or responsibility. This act mirrors fatherhood in its most basic aspect of building a safe boundary for the mother and the child to grow and prosper. Then Cancer follows, needing that space and those boundaries to nurture safely, because only then Leo, the child of creation, can thrive. A secure container must come before healthy creation can occur. And it's usually when the mother needs to do the protecting that we see the smother mother, fear-driven Cancer archetype of caregiving. I love your work. Goodbye.
All right, Atheos, thank you so much for the contribution there. Essentially saying that he sees it that Gemini is a builder. I just did a video that really got into brick symbolism with Gemini and the Gemini twins. It's a whole deep weave. I'm sure we talked about it in the last episode. So Gemini being a builder of sorts, building the nest, building the container, and then Cancer being sort of the protector of that container and creating a safe space, right? A safe home for the child. And he sees the child as being related to Leo. Another way I've heard it is that Cancer would be sort of the symbolic body of a child, and Leo would be sort of the spirit of the child. That is expressed, within that body itself. So there's a few ways of looking at it, but I think it's all interesting and, just worth considering.
Yeah, I agree. And I do like the way he looked at Gemini, Cancer, and Leo as that they all depend on each other. And I guess essentially you could look at all the zodiac signs like that they all play off of one another in some way. But I really did appreciate those points. So it was a nice, even in my mind, the imagery of that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of patterns like that in the zodiac. And so that's one of the things I love people's perspectives on, is seeing these different patterns. There's a huge pattern between all of the signs, basically. But you can kind of fragment the zodiac in some ways and almost pick up like micro storylines and things like that. And so thank you for that voicemail.
Hey, Mario and Michelle. It's Mike. Also, congrats on the wedding. I love you two as a couple. Love it. Awesome. You two, you're going places. You're going to have lots of kids. I know it. Anyway, Cancer. So there's something I realized about Cancer. And that is they are, I think, the sweatiest people. Because I know a few of them. And every time I'm together with them, I don't know if it's because it's like water energy and I have a lot of fire and earth. It like makes them condensate. Like we could be doing nothing and they'll still be sweating. It could be winter, they'll still be sweating. You know what I mean? And this is with multiple people. So does that make sense that Cancer is a cardinal water sign? So like is it the beginning of water exiting us? Because like if there's no water in the human, there's no life, right? So is that the cardinal aspect of it? Is it coming into this realm outside of the body? That's just a thought that I had. Let me know what you guys think. I'll keep this short.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for that voicemail. Very interesting take. Are Cancerian people more sweaty? I don't know if I consider myself to be a very sweaty person. Maybe my wife right here has an opinion on that. But I can kind of see your point on a few different levels. One, we're dealing with summer.
Yes.
So we're dealing with a time of year where a lot of people are sweating. Two, we're also dealing with salt water, right? Or at least it's salty in taste, so maybe not literally salt water like you would associate with the ocean, but it is salty water nonetheless. And so that reminds me of the correspondence that the crab obviously has with the ocean. Obviously, as you mentioned, we are mostly water, right? The earth is mostly water, and water plays a pretty big deal here. As an example, I just said that water may very well be an expression of ether or spirit itself. So symbolically, I'm intrigued. And it also reminds me of tears as well, which I know we have a voicemail that'll be talking about that and the Cancer relationship with crying and weeping. And so that also has a salty taste to it. And Cancerian people are emotional people, right? They've been called crybabies and things like that. They can be moody and whatnot. So just in general, it's something that I think is very, very interesting. I would love to know what someone who spends a lot of time with natal charts and speaks to a lot of people, what they would say. So someone like Robert Phoenix or what have you, what would he say about this correspondence? So what do you think, Debbie?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. Always nice to hear from you. And makes me think of headwaters. And how he was talking about, are these the waters of the beginning? Is that what we're dealing with Cancer? And so I immediately thought of the headwaters of a river and how important that is and how powerful the headwaters are. I'm often reminded of the headwaters of the Sacramento River, which is located at Mount Shasta, which is a very powerful place. The water at the headwaters is very pure. You can put it in bottles, you can drink it. It's usually the quality of spring water. And It hasn't been touched by anything on the outside world. It's all coming from underground, then entering the outside world, and ultimately out to the ocean.
Right, right. Well, this really opens up a whole rabbit hole because Cancer is the first watery sign in the new year. Right? And so you have Aries, a fire sign, you have Taurus, an earth sign, you have Gemini, an air sign. Cancer is cardinal water. So it is kind of symbolically the headwaters, as you're saying. Also, there's a lot of myths that say that Cancer, literally, it was the time of Cancer that perhaps the world was developed. There's a few things going on in that regard, or even the horoscope of the world itself, like, starts with Cancer, basically. And so, for a few reasons, there is a deep, deep weave with what you're saying with this headwaters business and primordial waters and everything else. And the crab, too. I mean, in my opinion, if you're looking at all of the creatures of the zodiac, the crab is the most primordial one, right? And so it exists in darkness, you know, for the most part. Again, it retreats. There's this sort of backwards almost kind of concept with it, this darker sort of dynamic, right? And so I think there's a lot of things to sort of chew on here and pull at. So thank you, Mike, for the contribution.
Well, I think that it's interesting that the Cancer season is right after the Gemini season. The Gemini is a symbol of duality. As you said in a previous video, they are twins. And they may represent the combination of two opposites powers, like darkness and light, or masculine and feminine. Well, I think Cancer comes to transform the energy between those two energies. Like, whereas in Gemini, they look more steady, they are like two lines next to each other. The symbol in Cancer comes to represent the fluxes between those energies, like the coming, the one of the other, becoming one the other. It's like two sperms going in circles, or yin and yang. And it's fair that it represents death and transformation and maybe some kind of rebirth. Yeah, it looks to me like an embryo.
Okay, that voicemail comes from Vez. Thank you so much for the contribution. Basically saying Cancer transforms what's established in Gemini, or what Gemini is known for, right? That Gemini has more of this vertical kind of fixed orientation, even when you just imagine the glyph. Cancer, even when you look at the glyph, is more horizontal and it's spinning. And so this transformative quality of Cancer basically shaping and kind of performing alchemy on the energy of Gemini, right? And so I can see exactly what he's saying there. I think there's something to that. And I like the fact that he brought up rebirth as well. Reminds me of reincarnation and things like that. And just want to highlight the idea that there is this concept that when you sort of become enlightened, that you basically go through a symbolic rebirth, and that they even call it the second birth as well. And there's even this concept of a third birth, right? And so this transformative quality kind of never ends, basically. So this constant churning, right? Always perpetually bringing about new creations, new movements, new cycles, you know, new expressions, things of that sort.
Yeah, and to go on that point of transformation, what I think of is regeneration, really. And the fact that we as people and our bodies are in a constant state of regeneration.
Yeah.
That's what our bodies are built to do. In my opinion, our bodies are built to heal. And so we are constantly regenerating cells, regenerating skin, regenerating organs and bones. Everything about our body is about regeneration. And that's why it's so important to take care of yourself, because when you are taking care of yourself and you're paying attention to these things, the regeneration is going to happen more quickly. It's going to be more effective and more efficient, and you're going to have longevity because of that. And when you're not paying attention to that, when you're not paying attention to the things you're putting into your body, the things you're consuming, the things you're concerned with, the regeneration is slower. And then that's when stagnation begins. And that's when illness can pop up more easily, because we're not generating or regenerating as quickly as we're actually built to and meant to be.
And you know what's really interesting about that? I haven't looked into this in a long time, but you know what they say? How often we completely regenerate new cells, how long it takes? 7 years.
Oh, interesting.
So the number 7 pops up once again, right? So anyways, good stuff. Thank you once again, Vez.
Hey, Mario. I want to thank you for all the great work that you do on this channel, as well as opening up this space for me to share some thoughts on Cancer season, and I'm going to specifically speak through a Jewish symbolic lens. So in the Jewish calendar, Cancer season aligns with the Hebrew month called Tammuz. Tammuz is an ancient deity, otherwise known as Damuzi, who was worshipped by mourning his death through ritual weeping. People would cry over his death in order to bring about his rebirth. This energy is reflected in Jewish history. Historically, many of the collective calamities of the Jewish people occurred during Tammuz, or Cancer season. It's a season of national and spiritual grief. This concept of mourning something to bring about another blessing is found a lot in Jewish thought. For example, when Miriam, who's the sister of Moses and Aaron, died, the Israelites lost the miraculous well that sustained them. The sages say that they didn't mourn her properly, and that's why the waters dried up. The symbolism here is powerful. Water, tears, and grief and life are all connected. Miriam's name is actually a contraction of 2 Hebrew words, Mar, Yam, which literally means the bitter waters, evoking that deep Cancerian connection to emotion, to water, to nurturing, and pain. Her name also becomes Mary in the Christian tradition, and Mary mourns the death of Jesus, whose myth echoes that of Tammuz, a god who dies, is wept for, and returns. At the same time, Cancer season marks the beginning of the sun's descent. After peaking in glory, it begins its slow retreat. So this morning is cosmic also. The light is dying, and we're asked to feel it. According to the ancient book, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the Book of Formation, it attributes a sense of the human body to every single month. And the sense of the month of Cancer is vision, which is fitting, because through tears we wash the eyes. Grief can purify perception. There's a teaching in Judaism, whoever mourns the destruction of the temple will merit to see it rebuilt. We cry not in despair, but in hope, because when we allow ourselves to feel the bitterness fully, we can begin to see the deeper meaning within it. Eventually, even the tragedy becomes reframed as something that birthed a blessing we just didn't yet understand. In short, Cancer season, or Tammuz, is an invitation to feel, to mourn, to cry, not as weakness, but as a sacred participation in the cycle of death and rebirth. Through the bitter waters, we return to life.
Okay, Yaakov, thank you so much for that voicemail. Please contribute in the future, because that was very, very interesting and right up my alley. He mentioned the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a book I do have, and now I'm going to open it again, because it's been a while, and actually look at the correspondences between the signs and the different body parts, like Cancer relating to vision, and obviously this relating to ritual weeping and everything else. Also, just have to bring up the 7 again. He brought up Miriam. He brought up Mary as well, weeping for Christ, right? This reminds me of the 7 sorrows. And it's not uncommon for Mary to actually have 7 tears running down her face, representing these 7 sorrows of Mary. Also not uncommon for her to have 7 swords piercing her heart as well. So once again, this number 7 is really baked into a lot of Cancerian themes. But the idea of grief and this national sort of time of mourning, very, very interesting stuff. So there's a lot that I want to follow up with my own personal research as it relates to these topics. But it plays right into Cancerian symbolism once again with what I said regarding Cancerian people being emotional, moody, quote unquote crybabies and whatnot. So really, really deep stuff here. I very much appreciate this perspective for sure.
Yes, I second that. This was a great contribution, and it got me thinking of a few things. I love the concept of grief can purify perception and the washing of the eyes, the tears being basically the salve almost for for the eyes in a way. And, even a tragedy is a gift. That's something that is very hard to remember when you're going through a tragic moment or having a memory of a tragedy. But really, it is that moment of clarity sometimes that can come when there is something that's so traumatic that happens that you really need to shift your perception in a way that you weren't able to do before the tragedy struck.
And you know what's really interesting about this too is the fact that Cancer comes after Gemini, and Gemini has a lot of symbolism related to conflict, war,
Yes.
aggression, civil war, etc. So I think that that's fascinating that comes after that season, right? And so to me, this makes a lot of sense. So once again, I'm going to do some more digging in this regard, but that was fantastic. So thank you once again.
In the ancient mysteries, Cancer was known as the entrance point, the silver gate through which spirit descends into the body, the womb, the origin, the contract to become someone in this world. And because of that, it holds an ancestral imprinting, a memory that goes well beyond this current timeline. And that's why Cancerian types who may feel very sensitive or overly intuitive or carrying emotions that aren't theirs might be, because it is such an ancestral sign. And opposite, the partner sign, Capricorn, which shows where the souls descend back into spirit. Through its remembering, not resisting, we heal and we come home to ourselves.
All right. Thank you, Molly, for that contribution there. Very interesting. I love the idea of Cancer being an ancestral sign, as you put it. It makes so much sense to me. It really resonates. Even just the idea that we come from primordial waters, right? And there's even this idea that there are waters above and below, right? That's in the Bible. And so we come from primordial waters. This extends over to amniotic fluid in the womb, right? And the fact that we're mostly made out of water. And for a few reasons, this is actually reminding me of something that I've read a couple of times. And it's that the creature that predates Cancer, that apparently a lot of crab symbolism came from, was actually serpentine symbolism. And there's so much primordial ancestral symbolism associated with the snake, it kind of will make your head spin. The snake is one of the most powerful sort of creatures symbolically out there in the animal kingdom. And it kind of reminds me of some of what we were talking about earlier with the serpentine-legged charioteer, right? Like Erichthonius or Abraxas. So I can co-sign with a lot of this, just the general sentiment of it I'm into. What do you think, Bob?
Yes. Thank you, Molly. Great points all around. It's making me think of a few things here. I always love the silver and golden gate aspect of Cancer and Capricorn. There's so much to go off of there. The access, as you would say, of Cancer and Capricorn, that duality, the gate of man, the gate of the gods, which we kind of touched on in the beginning of the show. But really, again, the water element coming through and water holding memory and the ancestral connection perhaps with Cancer and then with the mother, but then even further with the ancestors and the fact that we mirror our ancestors. We are aspects of our ancestors and vice versa. We hold these memories of our ancestors for better or for worse, and we play out some of the same themes throughout our lives as our ancestors do and our relatives. And then to go a step further, water is the original mirror. And that mirror is the reflection of you, which then goes back to the whole points that have been made throughout the whole episode of the internal movement of Cancer and the going within and the internal growth that happens. And then you see that on the external as well. And then I also think about scrying when I think about the mirror and I think about water and what scrying is and what scrying represents, which is basically looking into your own reflection or trying to see maybe perhaps the future. But I think really what you're really doing when you're scrying is you're really just going into yourself and you're trying to get insights into a certain question or a certain aspect of something that you're seeking. And so really that's what it ultimately, I think, comes down to.
Yeah, no, mirrors are extraordinarily deep. I actually think we talked about it briefly last time in the last episode with Gemini, which makes sense because you're talking about the twins.
Right.
And sort of the symbolic invisible twin that you have with yourself, your spiritual double, right, is another way of looking at it. And so the idea that water is the first mirror, definitely appropriate. It even really, and this is very heady stuff, but goes into this idea that everything is a mirror or reflection of an original sort of thing. And so everything, another way of putting it would be everything is sort of an echo or a fractal of an original concept or a primordial unity, principal unity, and that everything is basically kind of an emanation of that, right? But that at the end of the day, there is one sort of unified source, one unified principle that everything is ultimately just that reflection of, right? So anyway, very good stuff. Also, just want to say too, that this idea of the silver gate being Cancer and the Capricorn gate being the gateway of the gods or a golden gate, what I've really found is that all of the signs, all of the partner signs, the axis points between the different signs in the zodiac wheel, all 6 of them, right? 12 signs, 6 pairings, they all kind of represent this. That's what I found. So you can find a lot of symbolism, as an example, with Taurus being the silver gate and Scorpio being the golden gate. You can find symbolism that relates a very similar thing to Gemini and Sagittarius. And there's a few reasons why this is the case. Because, I'll say probably the main one would be that they all are representing the original gate, the original sort of portal or axis, which would be the world axis, right? Towards the northern sky, this stairway to heaven. And this very much relates to primordial traditional symbolism, which, as people know who like to follow my stuff, I'm a follower of, right? And so all of the pairings in the zodiac kind of represent a similar sort of thing. And so that's not to say that, in my opinion, Cancer is the only sort of gate of man, right? I think that there's several, because they're all echoing the original gate of man. They're all basically kind of like mirrors of an original source or echoes of an original sort of thing. So that's at least my take with it, right? Okay, so that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much to everyone who contributed. Honestly, I am filled with gratitude, and I'm kind of in awe with some people's perspectives and what they were able to bring to the table. And I think it's a really, really valuable thing that we're getting other people's insights, right? And so I'm loving this format. So please keep the insights and voicemails coming. We will see you guys next month for an episode on Leo.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, this concludes the live recording Michelle and I made on Sunday, June 29th. A big, big thank you to everyone who submitted something, but especially Emily Ridout, who was our special guest for this episode, and she delivered an excellent voicemail, I might add. Emily's work can be found at astroyoga.org if you're interested in her astrological or yoga services. Also, big shout out to Katrina, who has become our most regular contributor and is always giving us symbolic gems to consider. Lastly, I want to give thanks to Molly, whose voicemail I used to open up this episode. Also, in case you weren't aware, I am available for tarot readings, study sessions, and symbolic birth chart readings. It's really a pleasure to meet all of you and talk symbolism and tarot. You can, of course, book on my site, symbolicstudies.com. And as always, you can text me at 503-893-4606 for more info. I'm also available for branding and graphic design services as well. You can head on over to my site to check out my portfolio. And if you have a project in the works, I'd love to know how I can help. Once again, for exclusive content, head on over to patreon.com/symbolicstudies or symbolicstudies.com/secrets. I post weekly updates every Friday. Every other week, I post something exclusive just for supporters. As an example, this podcast is available a week early for subscribers. Without a doubt, this is the best way to keep up with everything I have to offer, and it's just $5 a month. And that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you next month with a show on the symbolism of Leo. Until then.